Fine. So, my first question, how were you approached to compose the music for Back in Action?
Well, I was lucky on this one because I had done the last three movies that Seth Gordon had directed, including Horrible Bosses and Identity Thief, and so we had worked together quite a bit. And so he called me and said he wanted me to score it and sent me the script, which I read before he even started shooting, and I just thought it was fantastic. And really, really fun and clever, and it had a lot of the humor that like a James Bond movie would have, but also had all these great action set pieces and sequences. So I told him I was in right away, of course, and I was really excited to do it. And I was thrilled. So yeah.
What was your starting point for imagining the musical identity of this film?
Well, the big thing for me was we had quite a bit of time um, because Jamie had had his health scare and his big issue at the end of the first part of filming, that we had to sort of wait and had some time for him to get healthy again after the small stroke he had. And so Seth and I had time to really go in, and they had just taken all the footage. It wasn't even the whole movie yet because they were still missing some scenes, but there was still a lot of this movie they put together in a very rough form. And so Seth and I sort of played around for a long time with what is this? What's the identity of this score? What do we need it to do? And one of the things we knew it was going to be a big score with full orchestra and a lot of electronics also, because there was a lot of tech aspects in the fact that that they're searching for this hard drive, and it's modern day, and there's all kinds of espionage. But we also knew that because we were going to be in Europe, and there was a lot of obviously Glenn Close is very savvy, and we knew there was a lot of sort of of really intelligence kind of things, and I mean that in terms of like MI6 intelligence kind of thing, that we wanted the music to feel really a little bit cerebral on top of the muscle, and the visceralness. So we really decided early on that we wanted to have elements of classical mixed in with muscle, and we did this by I did a lot of work with motives of multiple notes that repeat, and then I would change their meters so that sometimes they would line up and sometimes they wouldn't, almost the way like a minimalist composer like Steve Reich would do. And so we did this early on, and Seth really gravitated. He said he loved it because it felt like they were getting bits and pieces of information bit by bit, and sometimes things would line up and they would have a clue, and another time they would be like, I don't know what's going on, and that felt really good to him. And then he also felt that represented the two of them, represented Jamie and Cameron's characters working as a team and working as sort of like a 1-2 punch. When they sometimes would lock in, they were the best there were. And then over top of, or underneath that, we could do that over top of big long brass and big long basses and cello and things like that with huge percussion, and it would give us all the gravitas of something that literally was, where huge cities like London and Paris could get flooded if things weren't done right. So it was a way to do small and intimate for them and the family, but then also be bigger for the whole thing. And then Seth came early on with a bunch of examples that he really loved of solo cello. And I said, well, what if we, instead of solo cello, because we have two main characters, what if we do two cello and we have one on the left and one on the right? So we got two cello soloists, two really good friends of mine, who've played for me a lot, Cam Stone and Ro Rowan, and they played basically each character, and they would be on top of each other, left and right in the speakers. And then we also brought in some vocal soloists, both to sing the melodic content of the score in some key moments, but also to do a lot of vocal percussion. So Wayani, who was on The Voice, and Crystal Simmons, who was actually in Rogers the Musical that I wrote, they came in and they did a lot of percussion with their mouths and their bodies. And I felt like what that did was it felt human subconsciously. So what it gave was especially it felt like something that the kids might listen to. It felt like the action score was being joined by something that the kids would think was cool, and it gave it a warmth and a family undertone that I think was really important to both Seth and I. We both have, we both have kids, and that was a big part of this movie, was making sure that no matter what they were doing, yeah, they were saving the world, but really they were just trying to take care of their family. And that was the most important point. That was why they had this amazing skill and the ability to sort of win at the end of the day.
Sorry, the film is rhythmic and intense. What challenges did you face of composing a soundtrack that would support this energy?
Yeah, yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, it was fun because, the last three films that Seth and I have done together, they had moments of action, but they were mostly comedy. And so to finally get a movie where Seth came to me right away and said, we're going to pretty much write this score with no comedy. It's going to be action for the most part. And we're going to let the source music do any of the comedy stuff. And he wanted it to feel really intense and huge, and like the stakes were big. And so I knew we would have to do a lot of action music. I knew we would, like I said, be able to incorporate some of these classical elements, but I also wanted there to be giant percussion and lots of synths and stutters and things like that, because you had hard drives and secret codes and there were special devices and all of these things that feel very modern in that way. And I knew that I wanted that to be a part of the score. So when I started playing stuff for Seth early on, he loved these repeated figures that would go really fast on top of each other and go back and forth with big percussion. And so I knew that's sort of was going to be the cornerstone of the score. And then the other thing I really knew I wanted it to feel was off kilter. So a lot of the action music does have different meters to it. Sometimes it's in 7, sometimes it's in 3, sometimes it's in 5. And it goes back and forth a lot. And quite honestly, that's just because I miss that kind of action music. That's what made me fall in love with film scoring. I miss Jerry Goldsmith. I miss Basil Polidorus. That's what I wanted to do. So I wanted to do a modern take of, like, what if you mixed James Bond with the best of Basil and the best of Jerry and that era of like the 80s or late 70s, 80s, 90s action movie, but with modern synths and those kind of off kilter, jagged tempo changes and tempo meters or meter changes. And that's, I think, what I really accomplished. And thankfully Seth thought that was a lot of fun. Because I don't think, I think a lot of action scores, a lot of them tend to be in 4 now, and they tend to use the big percussion only to be part of the intensity. And Seth wanted it to feel faster. Seth wanted it to feel really, really fast and unpredictable. And so, like, things are twisting and turning just like the plot is twisting and turning. And so I think that's what hopefully we were successful doing.
Can you tell us about a case scene in this film where music plays a crucial role?
Oh man, I think hopefully a lot of places. But I think the thing that I think Seth gravitated towards right away was in a couple of the tracks that you probably heard. One of them is called "Hell of a Call." It happens at the end of a track called "The Bakers 2." Where you hear this repeated set of notes, dun, 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 and you hear it going over, and multiple instruments do it, and they don't always do it at the same time. And as I said, they sometimes they lock in and make sense, sometimes they don't, and they're in either ear. One's in the left, one's in the right. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. And the thing that Seth gravitated toward was he wanted the audience to realize that Cameron and Jamie were a team. And the only way they were going to be able to save their family and save the world is if they work together as a team. And so, like, when these cogs are moving and things are working into place, so these these motives, these sets of notes, when they start working together more and faster and faster as the movie goes along, he said it made him feel like Cameron and Jamie were working together more, just like the music was. And so by the time they get to these final few chase scenes, they were a team, and then their family was a team, and that's the way they were able to sort of foil the problem at the end and end up being successful and saving everything. And I thought that idea specifically in that track Hell of a Call, where it really starts to come out, and the family knows that that's where they tell the kids what that they were spies and how this all was working, and that they were part of this big, this big evil plan. And so I think that's where it all starts to come out, and that's where the movie starts to really roll forward and have this pacing that hopefully keeps everybody on the edge of their seats.
What techniques or instruments did you use to give a soundtrack a distinct tone?
Yeah, well, this one was really important too early on. Definitely the two cello approach was something that Seth jumped on right away. He loved the sound of the cello. So did I, and I knew that the two people who I wanted to hire, so we had them do it. And then the same thing with the vocals, but we also used a lot of really interesting things in terms of our percussion tracks. There are whole percussion tracks that are literally made up of cocking a gun, shell casings hitting the ground, being ejected from the gun. We went and my daughter and I went on top of a bridge and actually sampled us hitting different wires on the bridge, because there was this big cycle chase later on where they went across this bridge. We wanted to use that as part of it, and so we used those within the body of the score as our rhythms. We also did a lot of things with we used hurdy-gurdy and dulcimers from Eastern Europe and the Baltic area, which is where some of our villains are from, and we sort of combined that all with these sampled percussion. There's even a scene actually early in the show when they steal the drive from Gore's house and they pull it out of this big wooden desk. And so we actually sampled sliding drawers in and out of the desk. So as you hear some of these tracks, you'll hear that the drawer slides feel like percussion. And so you hear the drawer go shum, 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 and that's part of the percussion. And so we tried to incorporate all of these sounds as we were going along, to really bring us, hopefully, a unique thing that people haven't heard before. Not in a way that's distracting, but just in a way that's like, oh, this does feel like a modern take on a classic spy espionage movie, but there's all these things that don't just feel like synthesizers. They feel more organic. They feel like they're more connected to the story, and hopefully subconsciously they do, because they're actually things that we see in the story on screen, and we made percussion out of those.
How long did you have to compose the entire soundtrack?
Well, I would say from start to finish, it was probably, once we had a bunch of time to do, as I was saying, do the themes and the motives, specifically because we had extra time because Jamie had his stroke. But once Jamie came back and finished, we had about 3 months to do the rest of the soundtrack, to really take those themes and finish it and then orchestrate and go record. So it was about 3.5 months from when Jamie came back to that.
At what stage of the production are you brought to the score of the film?
Well, I was brought on early because I'm friends with Seth, and he had trusted me and wanted me to do this the score. So he sent me the script early on, and so I was really starting to think about it while he was shooting. And then definitely once I started seeing some footage, I was really putting my head around it and trying to figure out what the music could be. So I was brought on earlier than I often am, and I was glad to be able to have some of that extra time, because sometimes it's so rushed. But really, like I said, beyond the themes, I sort of waited until we had a good solid rough cut to sort of start writing things to specific scenes.
What do you think of the evolution of digital tools in music composition today?
Well, I mean, uh, uh, obviously, I think it's important, and I've always tried to use any sort of digital creation, digital tools, whether it be using samples of things or creating my own sounds by recording things that aren't musical and making them into music. Um, I tend to try to do that when it can do something that a real musical instrument can't do. So if I want to use French horns, if the right thing for, for example, that last big action scene, I want the French horns to play the melody because it's warm and it's heroic and it's victorious and it's thick and it's powerful. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use real French horns. But yet, when they're looking on that screen earlier in the movie and they're trying to figure out how to find the kid, and they notice that he's wearing that ring that's got the GPS locator on it. And there's all these little things that are going up on all these computer screens. So there's a situation where I'm like, wait a second, we've got all of this technology and all of these non-human computerist kind of things going on. So I'm going to use the technology that I have to create music using that. And sometimes it's using actual synthetic sounds, but sometimes it's also taking organic sounds, whether it be the vocals or percussion that someone would make out of their mouth, or even something like a guitar, and using the technology to adjust it, whether it be slowing it down, chopping it up, turning it backwards. One of the things you'll hear all over the score is there's lots of backwards guitar. And that's something that I thought was really fun because to me, it says espionage in a way, because the lead, our heroes are always trying to figure out what the bad guys are doing. And one of the things that I feel like represents that in a good way, whenever you hear something that's backwards, what it does is it takes the attack that used to be at the beginning of the sound and it flips it. So the decay starts first and then you build up to the attack. And to me, subconsciously, that's very synonymous with someone figuring out a clue. So if someone's figuring something out, if you're a spy and you go, oh, wait, that's it, now I know, that's to me backwards to a strike or backwards to an impact is something that's very synonymous with your brain figuring something out. And I thought that was really usable. And as I went further into the score, I think we did it even more and more as the pacing of the movie got faster.
How does your approach differ when composing for a film like this one versus a series like this excellent series, The Boys?
Well, I mean, it's funny. In some ways it doesn't differ at all because, you know, scary is scary and tension is tension and that is true. But that said, I would say, The Boys is very subversive and very raw. And, they're not dealing with billions of dollars and fancy Rolls Royce and Aston Martins and the highest technology. In The Boys, you've got superheroes with just visceral powers, and they're fighting, or the superheroes are fighting the actual boys who have no technology and no superpowers, and they're just gritty. It's all about like dirt and grime and grittiness, and so it's very not polished. Whereas a score like Back in Action, because these two spies are two of the best spies that have ever lived, and they're also in this espionage where you're dealing with MI6 and the highest amounts of money, and it's very polished. Like everything in the score is supposed to be precise and polished, and the way things talk to each other and switch back and forth are very very clean and precise. I mean, there's definitely distortion, and there's definitely like aggressiveness in the show because there's a lot of fighting and there's a lot of chases and things like that. But compared to The Boys, it's like one is like a perfectly painted, high resolution, painting, not perfect because I was perfect, but just perfect because it was very meticulous. And the other one, something like The Boys, is sloppy and it's angry and it's desperate, and it's sweaty and dirty. And that's really what that's all about. So when you've got, the cellos on Back in Action are bum 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 bum, and they're right on the beat, and they're right in tune. Whereas the violin, when Homelander's mind is going crazy, is not on the beat. It's not in tempo. It speeds up and it slows down, and it's completely in and out of tune. Some of the notes are in tune. Some of them get really out of tune. They bend all over the place. So it's the same initial concept, but it's the opposite execution of that concept, which I think is really probably cool. The first time I've really thought about it until you just brought it up. So thank you. But yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Does a series format give you more or less creative freedom than a film?
Oh man. The one thing I would say is that I think there may be more creative freedom in The Boys when it comes to the types of sounds and what kind of things are out of tune that you can get away with, because the characters are so off and unexpected and weird. Um, so there's that. But then there's also a freedom in something like Back in Action, because even though you can't be as out of tune and you don't want to be as sloppy, you can. I felt like I could put my own spin on a genre that people are familiar with. And that was interesting to me because I had never gotten a chance to do that. As I told Seth, I've mentioned, like, I don't, because I'm an American composer, I probably am not going to get hired to do the next James Bond movie, probably, even though I would love to do that. So this was kind of my, I've done the video games, thank goodness, which is fun, but like, I would love to do a James Bond movie. And this was my opportunity, I think, to kind of like, if I get to play in that sandbox, how am I able to sort of like bring my own little style to that in a modern day espionage movie? And so I actually felt a lot of freedom in that as well. And I had a lot of fun writing it because of that.
Is there a particular moment in your career when you felt you have found your musical signature?
Um, there's probably a few of them. There's quite a few. I would say the first time I felt like I did something that was really very, very much what I would consider to be what I do if I had no constraints would be Medal of Honor European Assault.
Mhm.
That was my main theme for that, that we call Dogs of War. Um, they kind of said, do whatever you want. We're going to have this opening and we'll make the opening fit you, but basically we're going to tell the story of this one soldier, and how he can make a difference. And so my grandfather was in World War II, and so I basically wrote this, you know this hymn style elegy, with choir and orchestra and melody that was like directly from my heart about my own family, thinking as if, my grandfather, the one man of being my grandfather, could make this difference, and what he would do being away from his family, or how he would feel risking his life for his, brothers and sisters in World War II. And so that was really where that came from. So I felt like thematically and in terms of the kinds of music I love to write, that was sort of my first like foray into something that I think, oh, that was really, my voice. I think big melodies. I was lucky enough to work for Basil Polidorus and Michael Kamen. So I really grew up with, like, I think the thing that both of them have, in a way that makes them special, is passion. If you listen to both of their whether you listen to Robin Hood, or or Band of Brothers, or Conan, or even Free Willy, there's an amount of like heart and passion to their melodic writing and their scoring that feels, I don't know, it feels very authentic. It feels very passionate in a way that, sometimes in modern scoring, you are encouraged to be subtle. And if you're over the top with emotion and passion, sometimes people will say, "Oh, that's old fashioned," and I do think that that's not true. I think when the characters warrant it, then you should do it. And I like to be in situations where I can be passionately enthusiastic or exuberant with my writing and my melodies, and I would say that I'm able to do that in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's pretty, sometimes it's scary, whatever. I think, I would consider Homelander's theme on violin to be very passionate, even though it's crazy and he's a maniac, but it's passion. It's not healthy passion, but it's passion. Whereas I would say also that, the theme for Back in Action is also passionate, both as a spy theme in a big action sequence, but also when the family is saved at the end, and it's very sweet, and it's warm, and it's mom and dad who love their kids. And I could very much relate to that as well, obviously being a parent. So for me, I think that's the thing that I think really brings that in. And I would say that even rings true with my songs. When I write songs for something like Rogers the Musical, and I do a song like, End of the Line, where old Cap is talking to modern day, to young Cap, and giving him advice, as a parent, I kind of could relate to that in the same way. And so even in writing that song, I was like, I wanted to be over the top passionate in that message. And I think that's the kind of job I relate to. That's the kind of scoring and project that I like to do, regardless of whether it's a big orchestra or a small ensemble or electronics or a song with lyrics. I try to kind of do the same thing with all of those. And hopefully that's kind of what people know me for.
And my last question, can you tell us about your current and upcoming projects?
Yes. Well, I got a couple exciting ones. We're doing season 2 of Gen V, of the Boys spinoff right now, which is really, really cool. I can't tell you anything that happens, but we're right in the middle of season 2, and I think that's going to get released hopefully later this year, and that'll continue a lot of the storylines that were happening in season 4 of The Boys, and then season 5 of The Boys, which is shooting right now, will come right after that, and that's the last season. So it's going to be really exciting. I do not know who lives or dies, but I'm very excited to find out, like everyone else is. But I know that it's going to be insane and wonderful. I think that's going to be really cool. And then, and the other thing they announced, which is really great, is another spinoff called Vought Rising, which is going to be Soldier Boy's origin kind of story, and it's going to be a period piece, which is neat, and that's going to be back with Jensen Ackles, who I love. And then I've got a movie coming out for Amazon this summer called The Pickup with Eddie Murphy and Keke Palmer and Pete Davidson. That's a real fun, like, buddy action film, and they have a great chemistry. We just finished recording that right before the holidays in London, and it's a really fun score with all kinds of groove and sort of some classic brass mixed with some really great vocals and soul and things like that. So that should be a really fun movie as well. I think that comes out maybe in July or August this summer.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Have a great day. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.